Two aspects of this conversation with dramaturg Aki Matsushita stood out to me most. One was learning what the expansive field of dramaturgy is all about. As Aki says, it's an art practice that doesn't necessarily show itself to people outside the development process. The practitioners themselves don't even agree on how to pronounce it. My biggest takeaway was that the dramaturg can help answer the question, why this story now? The other is a tangent I went on somewhere in the middle about cross-cultural communication. I was planning to remove it, but Aki's response was both generous and illuminating, so I kept it in. It's something I don't know much about, obviously, so I thought it might be useful for others to hear about as well. Here's my conversation with Aki. And so I want to thank you very much for talking with me today. In general, because I've looked at your work that you've done and the types of things that you do is super interesting, but also because I still do not, after a year, understand what a dramaturg is. And so now I'm talking to one, and I'm going to find out directly, what is a dramaturg?
Simple answer is that it's a close collaborator to theater artists, mostly, in developing the story and developing a play. Some people will refer to dramaturgs as like script doctors. We still can't all agree on how it's pronounced, dramaturg. It depends where you are. But it's a hard thing to describe because you're such a part of the process, but your work is not always visible to folks consuming the finished product. And I don't think you could pinpoint, oh, as a dramaturg, I did this, and this, but you can definitely sense your closeness to a story being told and your deep understanding of it. I understand that's all still very woo-woo and out there, but in more practical terms, if I could describe a dramaturgical collaborative process, I initially meet with an artist when it comes to a project. If I'm engaged as a dramaturg, I read all the materials that have been sent. And often that's how it starts. You start with a conversation, understanding the work, understanding the playwright, their intent. And then you start reading more drafts and asking the right questions at the right time and trying to make meaning out of their work at an early stage in the process where they might not have a clear sense of what that meaning is or what they are trying to say. In my studies for dramaturgy, like the one big question that we try to answer is, why this play now? And it might not always be in that sentence, and it can take different forms in new play development versus production dramaturgy. But essentially, I think that's the main question that I keep in mind. Why are we telling this story now? Why is it important to tell this story now? How do we tell this story effectively? Do we get lost? What world are we building? And so I think it's really a question of world building with a playwright.
That was a great explanation. Thank you. Actually, it makes a lot of sense to me now, but also like this crazy vision of, I think I need a dramaturg for my life. Like, what world are you building? What story are you telling? Do we need the story now?
Well, it's really fascinating because that's what my husband always tells me. He's like, dramaturgy is in everything. And my husband's not a theater person. He's a theater lover, but he's a stonemason. Like his life isn't about necessarily making meaning out of people's stories, but he sees how dramaturgy can impact people's lives, or having a close collaborator in life to talk through, to soundboard with, and to make meaning out of things. And And he actually met this woman. She is a neurolinguist, but has a background. She studied at the same university as me and has a master's in theater theory and dramaturgy. And so clearly in her practice, I haven't met with her, but she does counseling and also brings in dramaturgical practices in her sessions to kind of untangle and decode different meaning that you can attribute to challenges in your life or different aspects of your life. So it's funny that you mentioned that. There are people, I think, out there who are applying a dramaturgical perspective to their therapy practice, which is really, I think, interesting.
Very nice. We'll take that part offline. I can ask.
Yeah.
That's a
But but it's like a very, I think it's a very expansive art form in how it's applied to a lot of different fields.
Absolutely. And so can you tell me what brought you to that?
So I didn't even know dramaturgy existed until probably my third year of university. And I still didn't quite understand it, even after telling myself, okay, I'm going to go study theater theory and dramaturgy for grad school. I initially was brought to theater through a high school program. I went to this really wonderful Francophone high school in Ottawa that was an arts focused high school. And so I got to kind of be initiated to a conservatory styled learning where every single day for 4 years we had our theater classes. And it was a deep immersion into that art form, I would say. And from there, I didn't know what I wanted to do for post secondary studies. And so I did what I knew. And so I applied to theater, promising my parents that my backup plan was to go to teachers college. I realized while my undergrad was quickly coming to an end, I realized I didn't want to teach. And so I pursued a master's and I really got interested in thinking dramaturgically. And I don't even think I believed it was possible to be like to have a job as a dramaturg and say that's my career path while I was in grad school. It was just kind of a hope, and maybe doing a master's would open up some doors. And my supervisor would always encourage me. She's like, go seek out other dramaturgs. And it still didn't feel like a real job to me at that time. And so after graduating, there was an opportunity for me to move to Montreal. I applied for a job in arts administration. I thought, well, it's still in the same field and I can learn and I can sustain myself and stay in the field of theater. So I moved to Montreal knowing no one here. And for years, I worked at the National Theatre School. I started out as the assistant to the former artistic director of the English section, and I coordinated the acting program. And administrative work, I think I'm skilled at it, but it's not my passion. But I made the best of it, and it was really an amazing learning opportunity where whenever someone would say, "Do you want to try this?" I'd say, "Yeah," and I'd just say yes to everything, telling myself I'll figure something out. I'm still in the world of theater, and I was lucky enough to be asked by the director of the playwriting program, Andrea Romaldi, a wonderful dramaturg. She was the literary manager at Tarragon, I believe, for many, many years before coming to Montreal. And she said, "Would you want to apprentice with me? There's this project for the second year playwrights at NTS, and it's really focused on process and doing the full kind of development process of a play." And I said, "Of course." It was really like voluntary. And I did that for 3 years, which really allowed me to understand new play development because my education was really based in performance dramaturgy, a lot of play analysis and performance analysis. And I worked with a lot of productions that had already been done and analyzing those. So it didn't feel like I had practice in the development of a new piece. And so I did that for 3, 4 years, and it was so wonderful to learn from young playwrights who are learning their craft and getting to witness them and seeing, okay, when do you ask those questions? Or you see something and you're like, oh, but you want to give the artist some space. So it's really it was years of learning how to tango, when to when to ask the right questions. And then in 2022, there was a job opening at PWM, Playwrights Workshop Montreal, and I didn't think to apply, but then I did. And I luckily was able to begin working there. And I'm now in my third year of working there, and it's a gift to be a dramaturg that has a home. Since starting at PWM, I felt like, okay, I can call myself a dramaturg. It's not just this thing I do. And it really helped me realize, like, oh no, I trained to be a dramaturg, and I'm working in a place where that's what I get to focus on. In the last 2 years, was working full time in administration. I was teaching and also working part-time dramaturgy at PWM. And so it was a whirlwind. And finally, I think we're actually meeting at a wonderful time, because this summer I've transitioned over working more hours at PWM, and I've left my administrative position at NTS. And so now I'm no longer actually working in that arts admin world, and I've shifted to completely working artistically, which is a strange shift after nearly a decade, but a very welcomed one.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's cool. So for people can't see, she's beaming. Aki is beaming. She's in a very good place. And now your both feet are there. So that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
The first I'm going to say dramaturg now. When you started talking about what dramaturgy is like as a process and that collaborative relationship with the playwright, can you talk a bit more about it sounds like the relationship that you build with that person is absolutely fundamental. Like there must be a lot of trust that you need to develop with the other person as you're working through the process of helping them take their piece to where it needs to be, much closer than an editor of a book. It just sounds like a real partnership, but with you still in a supporting role. What is it like to develop that relationship with the playwright?
It's actually a really wonderful and beautiful process. I think given that it's such a vulnerable and intimate collaborative nature, that first and foremost, it's important to consider the project that you're signing on to, asking yourself before saying yes, am I the right dramaturg for this? Do I think I can help tell this story or help shine a light on this story and see where it can grow to? And really putting yourself in check, especially if you're working as a freelance artist, it's so tempting. And just as a curious artist, it's tempting to say yes to everything, but sometimes you're actually not the right person, or it's actually not the right project for you. So I think that's first and foremost something to consider. And then, yeah, it takes time, of course, to build trust. And I think in the initial conversations, there's partly just personalities. Like, am I the kind of dramaturg that you want to work with? But understanding how the person learns, how the person creates, how they collaborate is really important. So anytime I work with artists, until I really know them and have a shorthand with them, I often ask, how would they like their feedback? I'm not a prescriptive dramaturg at all. I won't come in and say, you need to do this, this, and this, and that's what will make your play great. And I doubt that there's that many there. I don't think there are many people like that, but I often take the lead from the playwright as to how I'll share feedback, or how it's often in question form and conversation based. And just by the nature of having a lot of conversations around focused and around their work in a supportive and very, I think, transparent manner, helps for trust to to be built even in those short bursts of working together. Yeah, always making sure that your feedback is welcomed and also finding the right way of framing it. Because I think already writing, it's so easy to censor ourselves when writing. It's so easy to feel blockages or to feel anxiety about writing. And I think my main focus is for a practice that is so individual and sometimes isolating. I want to make sure that any opportunity or any chance that they have, that writers have to collaborate with other people, that it's not a high stress thing, that it actually fuels them to go away and write.
One of the things that I thought of while you were speaking about your role as a dramaturg is being the right one for a particular project. And I was curious, what particular stories or themes would you say you are the best fit for? I don't know if it works like that, but if people come to you with certain kinds, how do you know that's a good one, maybe for you, and maybe one is a less good one? What kind of stories maybe are you most attracted to saying yes to?
So I think it's a big combination. Like my master's thesis was on intercultural adaptation. And so of course I have a little penchant towards those types of stories where yeah, we're having cross-cultural conversations and within art form, within content. But I think when I'm reading a play and if I can't put it down, or if my brain just starts sparking with a bunch of questions where I need to know more, I know for a fact how invested I may be. Of course, depending on the content, who the playwright is, what the story is about, I might not be the right person. I can do all the research in the world, but I might not have the personal lived experience to be the right person. Sometimes I think finding a dramaturg that isn't specialized necessarily in what you're talking about might be the right fit. Having to answer questions or really explain things to someone, for some folks, may help clarify. Might not be like that for everyone, but there is benefit, I think, in working with artists who might not be necessarily the expert, but they might be the right fit for that project. But I think I get very excited about different structures of plays when time works differently, or when artists are trying to play with other elements, other theatrical elements other than just text to storytell. I get really excited about that. But I think mainly I'm mostly drawn towards cross-cultural adaptations of more classical pieces. Yeah.
Can you give me an example of what that would be?
So an adaptation, a cross-cultural adaptation. As an example, the artist that I studied was is a Japanese post-war artist who would take very well-known Western plays, either be Cyrano de Bergerac, it could be Greek tragedies, Shakespeare, and they adapt it into a Japanese cultural context to subvert that original piece into resonating with a different audience that might not draw the same meaning out of it. But I feel like those plays are what allows us to connect across cultures. And so someone who watches an adaptation of King Lear and someone who knows the original very well, watching an adaptation of it may help you understand that culture in a different light through the common storytelling of, let's say, King Lear. I think the reason why I'm so drawn to those pieces and why I researched and wrote about it for 2.5 years was because I grew up in that reality, being biracial. Our house was a very, very, I'd say, well, multicultural, but a very Japanese household within a rural Ontarian landscape. And I was constantly, I guess, having that cross-cultural conversation. Okay, things in Canada are like this, but in my house it's like this. And in Japan it's like this. And not necessarily visibly in Japan, I don't look very Japanese, and over here, I don't look very Caucasian either. And so, being in that in between space, always having to kind of translate between cultures and trying to make meaning of what that means to me, I think it's always been a part of my life. And so, applying that to the fact that it comes out in my work and how and what my interests within my work is very telling. And I think it's a very comfortable place for me to be having those conversations.
Sorry, I had a deer in headlights, but I'm like, I continue on with the personal, but then I also had a question with somebody else. I just had this forking moment in my head. I did want to ask you, is there a difference? This is going to be very esoteric and probably not that relevant, but is there a difference between taking an existing piece like King Lear and adapting it to current day, some other culture in Japan, for example, versus trying to build bridges today? So for you as a human being, there's the Ontario of today, there's the Japan of today, there's you and your family in a current context versus looking at themes from, because I'm also thinking about Anne Carson, and she did like beautiful poems and graphic novel, taking ancient Greek tragedies and stories and applying them to current day. Is that bizarre? I don't know why my head went there, but I'm like, is there a difference between taking stuff from before and showing how it's still relevant through a different lens today versus actually building these bridges across cultures today?
And using current, like,
Yeah.
do you mean like through current pieces of today?
Yeah, I don't know why it feels like a different journey. Like there's the one that's saying people 2000 years ago in a different country were experiencing something, and Anne Carson seems to do something with it that says it's still so relevant and meaningful to us today. So it builds a bridge sort of from the past, from a different place to today, versus what feels to me like some of the journey of cross-cultural communication today is, let's look at what's happening in different places across different people that's contemporary. And I don't know if it's trying to say it's similar across these different, like there's these common themes, or is it saying I'm trying to gain a better understanding of something that's very different from me, and I'm trying to create more space for difference versus there are these themes that I'm pulling from a different place where we're the same. I don't know. I've gone off on a complete, I don't even know if I'm making sense to myself. I don't know where that came from.
But I'm not sure if I can fully answer your question, but to me, I think culture can be a very expansive term. And
Okay.
so like culture from 2000 years ago to today, even let's say it's the same ethnic group that has shared traditions and everything, but from 2000 years ago, like there's a generational difference
Yeah.
and there's a generational culture attached to how people understand society and how they function in society and the role of art in society. And so I feel like culture, if we expand the meaning of culture and we look at it in terms of space and time, I feel, and values as well, and I feel like it can do the same work. Like that the root of it is a conversation to better understand each other's humanity.
Yeah, you're being very generous by giving me even thought into that, because I think what I realized I just talked myself and you into is realizing that still, if I look at ancient Greek literature and philosophy and culture, even though I'm a bit of a mixed bag of a person from different places, that's still culturally very relevant to me. The ancient Greek values are actually very, I think, resonant with who I am as a human being today in Canada, given my heritage and upbringing and all of that. It's very direct, as opposed to taking Japan and Canada and looking at how those bridge. They don't have a common heritage. It's very different. Like if you go to ancient Greek, you go to Canada today, and you go to Canada today, and you go across to Japan, it's a very different dynamic of cross-cultural communication. I guess part of it is also like, what's the goal? It's not necessarily alignment. It's mutual appreciation or openness to, but not necessarily drawing them together. I don't know how that, if we look at Japanese Canadian, you as a human being, who you are as a person, are you accommodating difference, or are you like a coming together, unifying humanity?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for the longest time I looked at it as separate entities of like and 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 yeah, I think now more and more I s- I see the complexities of two cultures contained in one human, and I guess two cultures contained in one story, in one play. But I do see my like I it's less compartmentalized now. And yeah, but there's always that conversation between two very distinct ways of being, two very distinct cultures that are happening in me. But whatever comes out of me is the result of that conversation, right? And I think in a lot of cross cultural adaptations, the play is the result of that conversation.
Learn more about Aki and her work through the Playwrights Workshop Montreal website at playwrights.ca, as well as her Instagram at KikiMG07.